is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Economic Community of West African States imposed tough sanctions on Mali earlier this month in response to delays in restoring civilian rule after a 2020 military coup. Mali was supposed to hold elections in February of 2022, but the military-led government has pushed that back by up to 5 years. Amikano Olasimi Goita blames continuing insecurity in the northern region. The sanctions include closure of members' land and air borders with Mali, the suspension of non-essential financial transactions, and the freezing of Malian state assets in ECOWAS' central and commercial banks. The move has been backed by the United States, the European Union, and former colonial power France. The death of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, overthrown by the military in 2020, also comes as thousands of Malians took to the streets to protest against international sanctions that have isolated the nation. So this week on the program, we look into the current situation in Mali, and we ask whether the West African leaders will manage to put the country back on the path to civilian rule. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, in a special summit earlier this month in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, the leaders of the West African bloc hit Mali's military government with sanctions that have cut off the country from regional trade and finance in response to delays in holding the promised elections. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai brings us up to speed with these developments.
The West African regional bloc, ECOWAS, had already suspended Mali from the organization after the military took over the government more than a year ago. But after junta leaders rolled back on promises to hold elections to return the country to a civilian government next month, leaders of ECOWAS nations met in Ghana's capital Accra to discuss the political situation. The group said the junta's proposal to move back to civilian rule within 5 years was unacceptable, and the decision to continue to impose sanctions, including the freezing of financial assets and travel bans on the country, was made.
These additional sanctions include, first, the withdrawal of ambassadors of all ECOWAS member states in Mali. Second, closure of land and air border between ECOWAS member countries and Mali. Third, suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali.
ECOWAS has also frozen Mali's assets in the regional bloc's central and commercial banks and suspended all financial support given to the country. In response, Mali has recalled all of its ambassadors in nations across West Africa and says it is shutting its borders with those countries. It is unclear the extent ECOWAS sanctions will affect Mali's economy, but some analysts believe it could deepen poverty and insecurity in the country.
You don't expect a credible progressive elections to be held in such a state of insecurity. In fact, things are so bad to the extent that the Malian authorities even had to seek the services of Wagner, with some alleging, some French sources alleging that there are well over 400 of them active in the country, with about 200 based in the town of Ségou, not far from Bamako.
Analysts want the West African leaders to negotiate with the transitional authority in Mali to decide on a new timeline to return the country to a civilian government.
I think February is too early. It's not practical. So if there's a way, and I also think, on the other hand, that 4 or 5 years is a bit too much. So if they can, on a gentleman basis, meet each other halfway, maybe a year or two, I think that could help. However, the most important bit to all of this is for the human securities to be addressed. And this cannot be done by the Malians alone or the military junta alone. They need the help of ECOWAS.
Mali's military junta says the transitional authority is open to dialogue with leaders of the regional bloc, but ECOWAS says it will only lift the sanctions after an acceptable and agreed timeline to return Mali to a civilian government is reached. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, let's broaden our discussion a bit further now. And joining us via Zoom in Accra, Omolara Balogun, Head of Policy Influencing and Advocacy Unit at the West African Civil Society Institute. In London, Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow, Africa Program at the Chatham House. And joining us from New York, Olajumoke Ayandele, Postdoctoral Research Fellow at NYU Center for the Study of Africa and African Diaspora. A warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining in this discussion. Omolara, if I may start off with you, because Malians took to the streets en masse last Friday after the military junta called for a protest against stringent measures imposed by ECOWAS over delayed elections. First off, what is your take on this?
It is pretty difficult to impose I would say democracy by the use of force. Democracy itself calls for freedom and wills of the people. So what we experienced last week, for a second, we need to think of what the need of the Malian people, what are they saying and how are they saying it? It is very clear at this moment that the military junta, albeit outdated style of leadership, it's not something that we want to welcome or accommodate in the region at this critical time where we are continuing to see a decline to our democracy. However, currently it does have the support of the Malian people. So at this point, if there is nothing we're doing, is to keep the room open for dialogue and continuous discussion. So reading the sanctions coming from ECOWAS, right. I begin to tell myself that no, we need to think a little differently and act differently at this point.
Jumo, see, the military did say that it will take up to 5 years. It wants a 5-year transition period. I mean, what's your reaction to the postponement of it all? Do you agree with Olamara?
So we have to look at it from ECOWAS's perspective, right? ECOWAS's credibility is on the line as it seeks to uphold fundamental principles of governance and contain regional instability. Thus, you know, the recently imposed sanctions that we have seen on Mali's military junta. But Bamako, on the other hand, has responded in equal measures to ECOWAS sanctions by also closing their borders to member states and have, as Omolara has pointed out, found it profitable to be defiant to these measures, giving citizens support and the various demonstrations that we've seen across Mali against ECOWAS's sanctions.
Right. Paul Melly, what's your thought, though? What does this signal?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous situation because you can see why ECOWAS, as Juma just pointed out, had to be seen to act. A lot of people were expecting ECOWAS to stand up for the principles of basic constitutional governance as set out in, for 20 years, West Africa has committed itself to the ECOWAS protocol that soldiers can't seize power and just sit in power by force. And when the Malian junta late last year, instead of pushing for a slightly longer transition, as most people expected, perhaps a few more months or a year, when they suddenly said, well, we want to stay in power for another 5 years, and most political parties in Mali opposed that, a lot of civil society groups opposed that, ECOWAS would have looked very weak if it hadn't taken a strong line. But as you point out, there is a huge risk because people on the streets, it's very easy in Bamako for the government to mobilize a big crowd, a lot of popular support, and then present itself as defending the Malian people against the horrible outsiders. And especially because those outsiders are incumbent heads of state, presidents, so it's easy to paint them as people of the elite, right, older generation, all that kind of thing. So it's a very, very fragile situation.
But Olamara, that is the point we want to look at the moment, because even though Paul says that, you know, the civil society and a section of the people opposed, you know, the situation, there was a lot of support from the Malian people. What do you make of that huge turnout? Why was there support from the Malian people?
Well, one of the points that the junta themselves raised, in addition to the suffering of the Malian people under the last democratic regimes, was the fact that the military themselves were also suffering similar, experiencing similar situation, whereby the resources and the support they require from the government to fight the terrorists and protect the state were seriously lagging at the time. And this has been the point that the elements within the junta and the leadership itself had called to be a major one for them to step in to rescue the Malian people from the myth or maladministration of the democratic regime.
Right.
Like I said earlier, this is not a popular position, and it's not something that we want to welcome, considering the fact that at this time we should be consolidating our democracy in West Africa. It's been a long fight to get here, and experiencing a junta regime like this is a serious setback. And honestly, I do understand where ECOWAS is coming from. ECOWAS needs to stand up for its commitment, and that's what they are doing. I wasn't expecting anything differently. But
let me bring in Juma at this point, Olamara. Let me bring in Juma at this point. Juma, I want to get your thought on that popular position that Omolara is bringing in, because we are seeing the Malian people coming out in support of the military regime. And there are those who are saying that despite the current situation, the interim government has actually brought stability to Mali. Do you agree?
Yes, to some extent. And that's because the military junta themselves have argued that a peaceful vote is more important than speed. And this delay that we see in the post-coup transition map is influenced, and we need to think about this, by the current security crisis in Mali that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So the lack of social safety nets that were not provided by previous civilian administrations and the previous interim government in cushioning the direct and indirect effects of the pandemic have helped to trigger this support that we have seen, this popular support that we have seen for the military junta. And that's because many citizens are willing to support this extended transition period, because in their own view, this is the only way that Mali would finally see stability, with or without the help of regional blocs such as ECOWAS.
Paul, your thoughts here. Talk to us about that popular support that we're seeing from the Malian people, despite the fact that the international community and regional countries, think otherwise.
Well, I think one of the things about Mali is that it had a very inspiring democratic revolution back at the beginning of the 90s. There was a dictatorial government. The security forces actually shot school children dead when they were protesting, demanding political change. And then a group of reformist soldiers deposed the president, embarked on a democratic transition, and for almost 3 decades, to some extent, the Malian political elite that emerged out of that period sort of believed its own publicity, if you like. They did successfully construct a democracy. They did have election after election after election, but little by little, a sort of complacency crept in. People got very comfortable. Many of the senior politicians of today are the same people who were around in the early 90s. And there's been corruption spread to some extent, right, especially among the political class in the capital. Things got rather comfortable. They got out of touch with the people, and they also, to some extent, neglected the soldiers on the front line. And although fighting the jihadists up in the north, and although some efforts had started to be made towards changing that, there's quite a lot of disillusion among ordinary Malians, particularly in Bamako. It's not that they want dictatorship, but they have lost a bit of faith in what the reality of the democratic leadership are providing. And so that's left this sort of space where now Colonel Goita can present this rather sort of nationalistic military agenda.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment and continue with this discussion. But let's now take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more on Mali-ECOWAS standoff. Stay tuned.
As we have said, the Malian people do not deserve these sanctions. In no case should the people of Mali be sanctioned in this manner. These people have done nothing wrong, and I think those responsible for the chaos in Mali are well known. At the beginning, ECOWAS had taken targeted sanctions against the political authorities who do not want to take concrete actions that could bring us to the end of the transition.
ECOWAS is determined to stay the course and not lose face. This sub-regional organization wants to be credible, but is no longer credible. ECOWAS is no longer credible because we have seen that in some countries, presidents have made constitutional revisions to extend their mandate at the head of their country, and it has done nothing. This way of doing things is likely to prove that this institution is no longer credible. It is not an organization at the service of the people, but at the service of certain heads of state.
Well, some of the reactions there from the protesters in Bamako, Mali last Friday, following sanctions imposed by regional bloc ECOWAS over delayed elections. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now let's continue with the discussion. Joining me in Accra, Omolara Balogun, in London, Paul Melly, and joining us from New York, Olajumoke Ayendele. Well, I want to continue with our discussion on the sanctions imposed on Mali by ECOWAS. And Juma, let's start off with you, because the cause for the protest was, in reaction to the imposition of sanctions by the West African regional bloc, ECOWAS. Do you think the ECOWAS sanctions are justified?
Yes, they are definitely justified. I do not think ECOWAS as a regional bloc is overreaching. The regional bloc's response is in line with the 2001 Protocol on Good Governance and Democracy. And without imposing these measures and sanctions, ECOWAS could be signaling to other ambitious soldiers in neighboring West African countries that there are limited repercussions to toppling sitting presidents in the region. So no, it is not an overreach. I think this is the right move for the regional bloc and response.
Olomarara, is it an overreach?
Well, I think, like Jumoke said, ECOWAS is doing what they have within their own protocols. And I wouldn't expect anything differently. However, I think that within other protocols of ECOWAS, especially its vision, which has transformed from that of the heads of state to the people, I think the people of the Mali should take, a priority here. When we look at the new set of sanctions that came out a couple of days ago, we realized that it has serious injurious effect on the people of Mali generally, and not, it's quite different from the initial sanctions that were targeted at the junta leaders and their allies, as the case was as at then. Right now, these sanctions would, if care is not taken, will worsen the humanitarian crisis that we have been witnessing in Mali for some years now. Currently, before the situation got this worse, we have over 200,000 Malian people who have been displaced from their homes as a result of the activities of the extremists in the north and other political crises.
Right.
And we also have issues of, drought, which continues to lead to, food insecurity in the country, and having sanctions that further restrict, humanitarian actors to access the people, financial support for the country. The ordinary man on the streets of Mali is going to feel this, the effect of this sanction more than the junta, who will still have access to basic resources that the Malian people could.
Juma,
so
and that is the question, though, Juma, here. That is the question, the adverse impact that the sanctions are likely to have on the, common Malian people.
Yes, yes, and that is something to take into consideration. That when we have economic sanctions, they don't necessarily target individuals, but they target the citizens. But it's not just economic sanctions; there are also measures on individuals of the military junta, and that's also something that we need to consider when we're thinking about Mali. Right now, the regional bloc has to send a very strong message, and I do believe that these measures that they have imposed is a step in the right direction. Now we now need regional leadership from, like, for example, the African Union to really support ECOWAS and to really signal to the continent that military coups are a thing of the past. And especially in the post-COVID world, this is not what we want to see the African continent transitioning into. We want to uphold participatory democratic processes when we're thinking about how to move the continent forward and how to secure its prosperity and its security.
Paul, do you think this is rather drastic given the end goal that ECOWAS wants to achieve, though?
Well, I think we need to remember that just a couple of months ago, people were talking that the Malian junta basically said, well, we can't hold elections in February. That's not realistic. The expectation in ECOWAS and more generally in the international community was that the junta would try and negotiate perhaps for a few more months, just a short delay. The rainy season will come along in late June, early July. So, perhaps elections in April or May might have been realistic. That would have provided plenty of time. Mali actually has held elections in the past, even with the security crisis it has proved possible for most people to go and vote.
Right.
So the military's case that the whole thing could be put back by 5 years doesn't really stack up. And from ECOWAS' point of view, we need to remember a lot is at stake here. In September, the military overthrew the president in Guinea. Now, he was corrupt. He had manipulated the constitution to get himself another term. He had become quite oppressive. The military intervention was very popular,
right.
But it came straight after Mali. And then just a few days ago, the reports are that in Burkina Faso, which is a very democratic country, whose government is relatively well run and whose president is certainly democratically legitimate, there were discontented soldiers who were plotting to try and overthrow his government. So that's the perspective that's driving ECOWAS. It's true that for ordinary people in Bamako, it's tough. I was talking to a friend in Bamako this morning, and he said the price of rice is going up, the price of sugar is going up, the price of oil is going up. It's really difficult. But the alternative was just to stick with some very narrow targeted personal sanctions. And since the soldiers haven't been in power that long and don't have assets piled up abroad, those personal sanctions are of rather limited impact.
Looking at the instability in northern Mali that has been a thorn for Mali for years now, what impact will these though have on the military's ability to regain stability for Mali as well as fight the jihadists?
I was reading an article a couple of days ago, and the article states that currently about 50% of Malian geographical, location is currently under the control of terrorists. And when we had constitutional regimes in place, democratic regimes in place, it was around 20 to 25%. At the moment, the terrorists, the violent extremists are seizing the opportunity,
right,
not only to smuggle, massive arms into the region to perpetrate, to strengthen the nefarious activities they are doing there, but of course to further destabilize the Malian army. So the protection of the security of the country is currently in jeopardy. And of course, the security of the region in the aftermath of this impasse is not something that is going to be easy for all of us to deal with. So we really need to come to the round table right about now and find a better way to resolve this crisis. Otherwise, we may have a bigger problem in our hand.
Right. So I want to hear your solutions to this crisis because It is still unfolding. It has been playing out over the last week or so. Paul, what do you think is going to happen next? How do you see all this playing out? And is there room for crisis talks? Is there room for dialogue?
Well, there's certainly room for dialogue. I think the question is, can somebody, and it might need to be somebody, an organization or an individual that is, as it were, from outside of both Mali and ECOWAS, who can get in there and persuade the Malian junta to make a realistic compromise offer that ECOWAS could accept. So possibly the head of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki, who is from Chad, so he knows the region well, but he is not West African, so he has possibly a bit of outside influence. Equally, we've seen rumors that Algeria is preparing to propose a compromise suggestion of a transition of about a year or 18 months, and one feels that that's the sort of timeline that might be a reasonable compromise. But at the moment, it's very difficult. ECOWAS can't back down for the reasons we've discussed, but we can see that Colonel Goïta, the head of the junta, is not going to suddenly climb back either. So,
Juma, your thoughts, what do you think is going to happen next?
Dialogue is definitely very necessary with this Malian crisis that we are currently facing. But at the same time, we need to understand that this decision to delay elections in Mali really raises several questions regarding the reputation of African regional bodies and the commitment of African member states to actually comply with their various protocols. So moving forward with trying to mitigate the Malian crisis, I do agree with Paul that strong leadership from the African Union is an essential component, especially in demilitarizing political spaces, not just in Mali, but in the continent as a whole. The case of Mali illustrates that the continent is still struggling with the political ambition of certain military leaders. And yet, if the African Union and other regional blocs such as ECOWAS are supposed to be champions of good governance, they have to really address the root causes of political instability and coups, including the illegitimate measures that have been used to extend the terms of incubants and their abuse of power.
Omolara, you have the final word. How do you see all this playing out?
I completely agree with the points made by Paul and Jumoke. I think addressing the root causes of all this crisis is one place we need to start from. And I think ECOWAS itself needs to take a quick and deeper look at the protocols on good governance, democracy and good governance to ensure it addresses different constitutional manipulations that we continue to see in the region, which often usher in this kind of crisis, tenure elongation, constitutional changes, illegal constitutional changes. These are some of the, fundamental issues that has led to this kind of crisis. And now for Mali, I think I want to agree that, that this very tough sanctions from ECOWAS is only to call for renegotiations of terms, because I know ECOWAS to be quite democratic in its vision and its mission, and of course is an organization that has prioritized the needs of the people, even as it's put it in its own ambitions. I think the earlier we took that opportunity to continue conversation, the better for all of us.
All right, that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our panel of experts in Accra, Omolara Balogun, Head of Policy, Influencing and Advocacy Unit at the West Africa Civil Society Institute. In London, Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow at the Africa Program Chatham House. And in New York, Olajumoke Ayandele, Postdoctoral Research Fellow at the NYU Center for the Study of Africa and African Diaspora. And remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter. And you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next time, goodbye.